vanishing light. It all started with me, Paul, driving down this lonely coastal road one chilly autumn evening. I'm a marine biologist, always been fascinated by the ocean. Funny, right? Since I almost drowned as a kid. The ocean terrified me, but I couldn't stay away from it. Guess that's how I ended up here, in this quiet, eerie seaside town. I pulled up to a rundown motel, the only place with a vacancy. The town seemed frozen in time, like it hadn't changed in decades. The people were friendly, but there was something off, like they were all hiding a secreté. I was here to investigate some mysterious fish deaths, but something about the lighthouse in the distance, its light flickering weirdly, drew my attention. The first night I met an old fisherman named Thomas at the local diner. He was grizzled, with a face weathered by salt and winded. "You're here for the fish, right?" he asked, squinting at me over his coffee cup. "Yeah," I nodded. "Strange how they're dying off like that." Thomas leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "It ain't the fish you should be worried about. It's that lighthouse. Best stay away from there after dark." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. Later, in the town library, I found an old, worn journal belonging to the lighthouse keeper, Elias. His last entries were downright creepy, full of talk about shadows and whispers in the night. Reading it gave me chills, like I was somehow reliving his paranoia. "Hey, Paul," I muttered to myself. "What are you getting into?" The sound of my voice, even to myself, seemed to echo back eerily. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of seagulls and the distant crash of waves. Something about the place still felt off, like the town was holding its breath. I decided to head to the beach where the fish had been washing up dead. The sky was overcast, and the air was heavy with the smell of salt and decay. As I walked along the shore, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. No kids playing, no dogs barking, just the wind and the waves. I found the fish easily enough, their lifeless bodies scattered along the sand, eyes glazed over and mouths open as if gasping for air. I bent down to examine them, and a shiver ran down my spine. Their bodies were covered in strange marks, almost like bite marks, but not from any creature I'd ever seen. That evening, back at the motel, things got weirder. I was sitting on my bed, reviewing my notes, when I heard a faint tapping sound. At first I thought it was the wind, but it kept going, steady and rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. It seemed to be coming from the window. I got up, heart pounding, and pulled back the curtain. Nothing, just the dark, empty street. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of being watched was difficult to ignore. I decided to visit the lighthouse the next day, to see if I could find any clues to Elias's disappearance. As I was leaving the motel, the manager, a quiet woman named Mrs. Green, stopped me. "You going to the lighthouse?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, thought I'd check it out." "Why?" She glanced around nervously before leaning in. "Be careful. Strange things happen there. Elias wasn't the first to disappear." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced a smile. "Thanks for the warning." The walk to the lighthouse was uneventful, but as I got closer, an uneasy feeling settled over me. The lighthouse stood tall and imposing against the gray sky, its light still flickering erratically. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The air was damp and cold, the smell of mildew strong. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light coming through the grimy windows. I explored the first few floors, finding nothing but old maritime equipment and dusty furniture. Then I heard it, a whispering sound, just on the edge of hearing. I froze, straining to catch the words, but they were too faint, like someone was speaking from far away. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing eerily. No response, just the whispering growing fainter until it was gone. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of unease settling in me. This place was getting to me. That was all. As I left the lighthouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone or something was watching me. Get a grip, Paul, I muttered to myself, but the sound of my voice did little to calm my nerves. The lighthouse loomed behind me, its light flickering like a dying flame. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened to Elias was far from over, and I was about to get caught in the middle of it. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The unease from the lighthouse still clung to me like a damp fog. Determined to find answers, I decided to visit Thomas again, hoping he could shed more light on the mystery. I found him at the diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as I approached, his eyes narrowing. "Back again, huh?" he said, his voice gruff. "What did I tell you about that lighthouse?" I slid into the booth across from him. "I know, but I need to understand what's going on. There's something wrong here, Thomas. I can feel it." He sighed heavily, looking out the window at the overcast sky. "You're like Elias, you know. He couldn't leave it alone either. Always digging, always questioning. What happened to him?" I asked, leaning forward. "What did he find?" Thomas hesitated, then leaned in closer. "He found something in the lighthouse, something that shouldn't be there. He said it was calling to him, whispering in the dark. Drove him mad." I shivered, remembering the whispers I'd heard. "What was it?" "Don't know," Thomas admitted, shaking his head. "But I know this. People who go looking for answers in that lighthouse don't come back the same, if they come back at all." I left the diner, Thomas's warning echoing in my mind. Back at the motel, I found Mrs. Green waiting for me, her face pale and drawn. "You went to the lighthouse again, didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I had to," I replied. "There's something going on, and I need to figure it out." She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, just leave it alone. It's not worth it." I pulled away, feeling a surge of frustration. Why won't anyone tell me what's really happening? What are you all so afraid of? She looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "It's not the lighthouse you should fear. It's what lives inside it." That night, the nightmares came back. I dreamt of drowning, of being pulled into the dark, icy depths by unseen hands. I woke up gasping, my heart racing. The room was dark, except for the faint light filtering through the curtains. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting closer to the truth, but it was a truth that might be better left buried. The fear from my childhood near drowning surfaced again, mingling with the dread I felt now. Why am I doing this? I whispered to myself. Why can't I just walk away? But I knew why. I couldn't let it go. Elias's journal, the dead fish, the whispers in the lighthouse. It all pointed to something bigger, something I had to uncover. The next morning, I decided to visit the town's historical society, hoping to find more information about Elias and the lighthouse. As I walked through the town, I noticed people avoiding my gaze, whispering among themselves. It felt like the whole town was conspiring to keep me in the dark. At the historical society, I met a woman named Emily, who seemed more willing to talk. She showed me old newspaper clippings and records about the lighthouse and its keepers. Elias was one of the last keepers, she explained, spreading out the documents on a dusty table. He was well liked, but people started noticing changes in him. He became withdrawn, paranoid. Then one day, he just disappeared. I scanned the articles, my heart sinking. The same pattern repeated with previous keepers. Strange behavior, whispers of madness, and then they vanished. "Do you think it's the lighthouse?" I asked, looking up at Emily. "Do you think it's cursed or something?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I think there's something in that lighthouse, something old and angry." As I left the historical society, I couldn't stop thinking about what Emily had said. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was terrifying. That night, as I lay in bed, the tapping started again. Tap, tap, tap. I clenched my fists, trying to ignore it, but it grew louder, more insistent. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and yanked open the window. "Who's there?" I shouted into the darkness. No answer. Just the wind and the waves. But I knew something was out there, watching, waiting. I slammed the window shut and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. I had to go back to the lighthouse, had to find out what was really happening, even if it meant facing my worst fears. "I won't let this beat me," I muttered to myself. "I have to know the truth." The storm had rolled in, casting the town in a cloak of rain and thunder. Perfect weather for confronting whatever lurked in that lighthouse. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, I made my way through the downpour, the wind howling around me. The path to the lighthouse was slick with mud, making every step a battle. As I reached the lighthouse, I took a moment to catch my breath, feeling the weight of the place settle over me. The door creaked open as I pushed it, the sound swallowed by the storm. Inside, the air was cold and damp, the walls dripping with moisture. The only light came from my flashlight, casting eerie shadows that danced and flickered. I started my ascent, the stairs groaning under my weight. The higher I climbed, the stronger the sense of dread grew. The whispers began again, faint but unmistakable. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, wrapping around me like a shroud. Reaching the top, I found the room where Elias had written his final entries. The air was thick with an oppressive presence, and I could feel eyes on me, though I saw no one. I took a deep breath and moved toward the hidden door Elias had mentioned in his journal. It took a bit of searching, but I found it behind a dusty bookshelf. The door led to a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. With each step, the air grew colder, the whispers louder. My flashlight flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of the walls, covered in strange, almost hieroglyphic symbols. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a primal fear taking hold. At the bottom, I found the hidden room. It was filled with old maritime equipment, and in the center, a grotesque mural of a monstrous sea creature. The thing in the mural had too many eyes, too many teeth, and seemed almost alive, its painted eyes following me. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the small space. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the room. In the corner, a shadow began to form, taking shape into something humanoid yet utterly wrong. "Elias?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The figure stepped forward, and I saw the twisted, tormented face of the former lighthouse keeper. His eyes were wide with madness, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "And why, Elias? What happened to you?" I demanded, my fear giving way to anger. "The lighthouse," he replied, his voice growing stronger. "It's not just a building. It's a gateway, a beacon for something ancient and evil. It called to me, and now it's calling to you." Before I could react, the temperature plummeted, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see the mural's creature seemingly coming to life, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter. The creature lunged, its form shifting and twisting, and I stumbled, falling to the ground. Pain shot through my leg as I hit the floor, and I realized I had cut myself on a jagged piece of metal. Elias's ghost hovered above me, his face a mask of regret and terror. "You have to destroy it," he whispered. "Break the cycle." With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the metal shard and struck at the mural. The first blow sent a shockwave through the room, the creature screaming in rage. I struck again and again, the walls trembling, the whispers turning into wails of agony. The mural shattered, and with it, the oppressive presence began to lift it. Elias's form started to fade. a look of peace replacing the torment on his face. "Thank you," he whispered before vanishing. The room fell silent, the temperature slowly returning to normal. I staggered to my feet, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The door, once locked tight, now swung open easily. I limped up the stairs and out of the lighthouse, the storm having passed, leaving a calm, eerie stillness in its wake. As I made my way back to the motel, I felt a strange sense of closure. The whispers were gone. The town seemed lighter, almost relieved. But I knew the memory of that night would haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface. "I did it, Elias," I murmured to the night sky. I broke the cycle. The next few days were a blur. I left the town behind, but the memories clung to me like the salt in the air. I could still feel the chill of the lighthouse, hear the whispers in the dark. Every night, I dreamt of Elias and the monstrous creature, their faces blending in a nightmarish collage. Back home, I tried to return to my normal routine, but everything felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sense that something was lurking just out of sight. My colleagues noticed the change in me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what had happened. Who would believe me anyway? One evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Emily, the woman from the Historical Society, had tracked me down. She looked just as haunted as I felt. "Paul, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. We sat in my living room, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken fears. Emily explained that after I left, strange things began happening in the town. People reported seeing shadows, hearing whispers. It was as if the darkness I had faced in the lighthouse had seeped out, spreading through the town. "It's like whatever you did disturbed something," she said, her eyes wide with fear. Something that was better left alone. I felt a cold dread settle over me. Had I really broken the cycle, or had I unleashed something even worse? "I thought destroying the mural would end it," I said, my voice hollow. Emily shook her head. "Maybe it wasn't about ending it. Perhaps it was about containing it. And now it's free." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. In my attempt to save myself and the town, I might have made things even worse. The nightmares, the whispers, they weren't gone. They were just waiting. That night, I dreamt of the lighthouse again. This time, I wasn't alone. I saw Emily, Thomas, Mrs. Green, all of them trapped in the dark, their faces twisted in fear. The creature loomed over them, its eyes gleaming with malicious delight. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The shadows in my room seemed to move, shifting and twisting. I could hear the faintest whisper, almost too quiet to catch, but I knew what it was saying. "Come back." The next day, I made a decision. I packed my bags and headed back to the town. I couldn't leave them to face this alone. I had to finish what I started. When I arrived, the town felt different. The air was heavy with fear, the streets eerily silent. I went straight to the lighthouse, its light flickering ominously. As I stepped inside, I felt the familiar chill, the oppressive presence wrapping around me like a shroud. In the basement, the mural was gone, but the sense of dread remained. The wall seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the whispers were louder now, almost deafening. "I'm here," I said, my voice echoing in the dark. "Show yourself." The shadows began to coalesce, forming into the monstrous shape I remembered. But this time, it wasn't just the creature. Elias was there too, his face a mask of anguish. "You can't stop it," he whispered. "It's part of you now." I realized then that the darkness wasn't just in the lighthouse. It was in me. The fear, the trauma. It had latched onto my soul, feeding off my emotions. I had become its new keeper. With a sinking heart, I understood what I had to do. I couldn't destroy the darkness, but I could contain it. I reached out, touching the cold stone of the lighthouse, and felt the darkness surge into me, filling me with its icy presence. The pain was unbearable, but I held on, channeling all my fear, my rage, into one final act of defiance. I would be the lighthouse's keeper, but I wouldn't let it spread. I would trap it within myself, sealing it away from the world. As the darkness settled into my soul, the whispers faded. The shadows receded. The town was safe, for now, but I knew the truth. The lighthouse wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding on the fears and traumas of those who came too close. And now, it had me. In the end, I had become the very thing I sought to destroy. The new keeper of the lighthouse, bound to it forever, guarding the world from the darkness within. The final twist? Maybe it wasn't the lighthouse that was cursed. It could be me all along. As I stood there, the light flickering around me, I whispered into the void, "I'm home." And the darkness whispered back, "Welcome." Beneath the bed. My name's Michael, and I live in a tiny, cluttered apartment in the heart of the city. You know, the kind where you can hear your neighbors fighting through the walls, and then the constant hum of traffic never quite goes away. I moved here after my girlfriend, Sarah, left me. It was a messy breakup, and honestly, I still don't fully understand why she walked out. She just said she couldn't take it anymore and left me standing there, dumbfounded. Most days, I work from home as a freelance writer. My life is pretty monotonous. Wake up, write, get coffee, write some more, maybe take a break to eat, then back to writing. The breakup left a mark on me, though I haven't been sleeping well, and every night I find myself haunted by memories of Sarah. I toss and turn, unable to shake off the feeling of her absence. It all started on an ordinary night. I was in bed, trying to fall asleep when I heard it, a soft scraping noise coming from under my bed. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, or maybe a mouse. I ignored it and tried to convince myself it was nothing. Probably just the neighbors making noise again, I muttered to myself, rolling over and pulling the covers up to my chin. But the noise didn't go away. Over the next few nights, it became more distinct, more deliberate. I started finding small things out of place. My keys moved from the counter to the coffee table, a book that was on the shelf now on the floor. It was unnerving, but I tried to brush it off as me being forgetful. One day, while grabbing my usual coffee from the shop downstairs, I ran into Mr. Jenkins, an old man who lived in the building. He was a bit of a recluse and always seemed to be muttering to himself. Today, though, he spoke to me directly. "You live in 4B, right?" he asked, his voice raspy and low. "Yeah, why?" I replied, a bit taken aback. "Just a piece of advice," he said, leaning in closer. "Whatever you do, don't look under the bed at night." His words sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that settled in my gut. Why would he say something like that? I laughed it off, trying to ease the tension. But his warning stayed with me, echoing in my mind as I went about my day. That night, as I lay in bed, the scraping noise returned, louder and more insistent, I pulled the covers over my head, heart pounding, trying to block it out. "Just my imagination," I whispered to myself. Just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right, and I was about to find out just how wrong things could go. The old man's warning lingered in my mind like a stubborn stain. I tried to shake it off, but every night, the scraping noise seemed to grow louder, more insistent. During the day, I went through the motions, writing, getting coffee, attempting to focus on my work. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the strange noises and Mr. Jenkins' cryptic words. One evening, as I was heading back to my apartment, I noticed something odd. The hallway lights on my floor flickered as I approached my door, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the walls. It was like the building itself was trying to warn me. I shrugged it off, blaming faulty wiring, but a sense of unease settled over me. Inside my apartment, the atmosphere felt different. heavier almost. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe. I walked over to my desk, ready to dive back into my writing. But I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept darting to the bed, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking underneath. "Come on, Michael. Get a grip," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. That night, as I lay in bed, the scraping sound returned, louder than ever. It was like nails on a chalkboard, grating on my nerves. I pulled the covers up, trying to ignore it, but then I noticed something strange. The air seemed colder around my bed, and I could feel a faint draft, like someone or something was breathing down there. I forced myself to stay still, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would burst out of my chest. The noise stopped for a moment, replaced by an eerie silence. And then I heard it, a soft whispering, almost too quiet to make out, coming from beneath the bed. I didn't dare move. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was it a ghost? A burglar? Something worse? The whispers continued, growing louder, forming words I couldn't quite understand. It felt like they were calling out to me, drawing me in. The next day I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they brushed it off. "You're just stressed, Mike," said my friend Jake over the phone. "You need to get out more. Take a break." "Yeah, maybe you're right," I replied. Though deep down, I knew it wasn't just stress. As the days went on, more unsettling things started happening. I found strange cold spots around the apartment, especially near the bed. Objects kept moving, books, keys, even my phone once. I kept feeling like I was being watched, even during the day. My once cozy apartment now felt like a prison, and the sense of dread never left me. I tried to distract myself with work, but my writing suffered. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every little noise. Sleep became a luxury, and when I did manage to drift off, my dreams were filled with shadows and whispers. One evening, I ran into Mr. Jenkins again in the hallway. His eyes seemed darker, more hollow than before. "Did you listen to my warning?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Yeah, but what does it mean? What's under my bed?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. "Some things are better left unseen," he said cryptically before shuffling away. His words did nothing to ease my mind. That night, the whispers returned, clearer and more insistent. They sounded almost familiar, like a voice from my past, calling out to me, begging for attention. The feeling of dread grew stronger, and I knew that whatever was under my bed was getting closer. I could sense it, inching nearer with every passing night. I had to do something, but what? Confront it? Run away? The fear gnawed at me, leaving me paralyzed with uncertainty. The stress was getting to me. Every night, the whispers and scraping sounds grew louder, more insistent. My sleep was fractured, filled with nightmares that left me drenched in sweat. During the day, I walked around in a fog, barely able to focus on my work. My writing was suffering, and my editor was starting to notice. "Michael, these drafts are not up to your usual standard," she said over the phone one afternoon. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just going through a rough patch," I lied. "I'll get back on track soon." But I wasn't sure I believed my own words. The sense of dread was becoming unbearable, and I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. My apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a trap. The walls seemed to close in on me, and every corner hid a potential threat. One night, I decided to call Sarah. We hadn't spoken since the breakup, but I needed to hear a familiar voice, someone who might understand. The phone rang for a long time before she finally answered. "Michael? Why are you calling me?" She sounded wary, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. I just needed to talk to someone," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Things have been weird lately." "Weird how?" she asked. and for a moment, I thought I heard a hint of concern. There's something in my apartment. It feels like I'm being watched, and I keep hearing these noises at night, I confessed, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders say, "Michael, you always had an overactive imagination," she said. "You need to get out more, maybe see a therapist." Her words stung, but deep down, I knew she was probably right. Still, the frustration boiled over. "You don't understand," I snapped. "It's not just in my head. Something is really wrong here. Look, I'm sorry you're going through this, but I can't help you," she said softly. "You need to figure this out on your own." The line went dead, and I stared at the phone, feeling more alone than ever. Sarah's dismissal hurt, but it also ignited a determination in me. I had to confront whatever was haunting me, even if it meant facing my deepest fears. That night, I decided to take action. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of desperation, I sat on my bed, waiting for the noises to start. As the clock ticked past midnight, the familiar scraping began, followed by the chilling whispers. I took a deep breath and swung my legs over the side of the bed, shining the flashlight underneath. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but dust and shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as I lowered myself to the floor, inching closer to the edge of the bed. "Come on, show yourself," I muttered, my voice trembling. As I peered into the darkness, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. I could almost make out words, but they were just beyond comprehension. Then, suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled back onto the bed, my breath coming in short gasps. I fumbled for my phone, using its weak light to scan the room. Everything was as it should be, yet the sense of dread remained. "Why won't you leave me alone?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. There was no answer, just the oppressive silence. I felt tears of frustration and fear prick at my eyes. Whatever was haunting me, it wasn't going to give up easily, and neither was I. I spent the rest of the night sitting on my bed, flashlight and phone in hand, determined to confront whatever came next. But as the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I realized I was no closer to finding answers. Only more questions. And the whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. The days blurred into nights, each one more torturous than the last. The whispers, the cold spots, the feeling of being watched, it all intensified. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, haunted by something I couldn't see but knew was there. One evening, after another restless day of failed writing attempts, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The streets were busy with people rushing home, the city's lights casting long shadows on the pavement. As I walked, I thought about Sarah, Mr. Jenkins, and the inexplicable events plaguing my life. The fresh air helped, but it was a temporary relief. Back at my apartment, I stood in the doorway, dreading what awaited me inside. I steeled myself and stepped in, flipping on the lights. The apartment seemed ordinary enough, but I knew better. I decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water would wash away the fear clinging to me. The steam filled the bathroom, and for a moment, I felt almost normal. But as I stepped out, I saw something in the foggy mirror. Words scrawled in the condensation. "Look under." My heart raced. I wiped the mirror, but the words remained, etched into my mind. This was it. No more hiding, no more running. It was time to face whatever was haunting me. I grabbed the flashlight and the small key I had found earlier, its cold metal pressing into my palm. I knelt beside the bed, the whispers growing louder, more insistent-y. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the covers and shined the light underneath. At first, there was nothing but darkness. Then, slowly, a shape emerged, a ghostly figure with hollow eyes, reaching out toward me. My heart pounded as I realized it was Sarah. Or rather, what was left of her. "Michael," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. "Sarah?" "Is that really you?" I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't answer, just continued to reach for me. I could see the pain and sorrow in her eyes, and it tore at my heart. I knew I had to do something, but what? The key in my hand felt heavier, almost burning with urgency. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, frustration and fear mingling in my voice. "Help me," she whispered, her voice fading in and out. I remembered Mr. Jenkins' words. Some things are better left unseen. But I had already seen too much. I had to help her, to free her from whatever torment she was trapped in. I reached out with the key, unsure of what to do, but feeling it was the right thing. As the key touched her ghostly form, a blinding light erupted, and I was thrown back, hitting the floor hard. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into screams, echoing through the room. I struggled to get up, my vision blurred, but I could see Sarah standing there, more solid now, but still ethereal. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Before I could respond, the light intensified, and she disappeared, leaving me alone in the now silent apartment. The oppressive weight that had been suffocating me lifted, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. But it wasn't over. I knew there were still questions left unanswered. I staggered to my feet, determined to find out what had happened to Sarah and why she had been haunting me. As I stood there, catching my breath, I heard a faint sound. It was the old key, now lying on the floor where I had dropped it. I picked it up, feeling its cold metal in my hand. It was a clue, a connection to the past that I needed to understand. The confrontation had been intense, personal, and terrifying, but it had also given me a sense of purpose. I had to uncover the truth, not just for Sarah, but for myself. And as I stood there, the whispers gone, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next. After that night, the whispers stopped. The oppressive presence that had haunted my apartment vanished, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. But the relief I felt was fleeting. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, about the look in her eyes and her desperate plea for help. The key I had found seemed to be the answer, but I still didn't know what it unlocked. I spent the next few days digging into Sarah's past, trying to piece together the puzzle. I reached out to her family, her friends, anyone who might have answers. Most of them were reluctant to talk, but I managed to learn a few things. Sarah had always been troubled, haunted by something she never fully explained. Her family had a history of mental illness, but no one knew the full extent of her struggles. One night, while going through some old boxes Sarah had left behind, I found a journal. Its pages were filled with her thoughts, her fears, and strange drawings of shadowy figures. One entry in particular caught my attention. June 15th. The whispers are back. They come at night from under the bed. I can't escape them. There's something in the old house, something I brought with me. I need to find the key. The key. The one I now held in my hand. It all started to make sense. The old house she mentioned was her childhood home, a place she had always refused to talk about. I had to go there to find out what had happened and why it had followed her. And now, I drove to the house, a dilapidated structure on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and the yard overgrown with weeds. As I approached, a sense of dread settled over me, but I knew I had to do this. For Sarah, for myself. Inside, the house was dark and musty, filled with the remnants of a family long gone. I wandered through the rooms, flashlight in hand, until I found Sarah's old bedroom. The walls were covered in more drawings, similar to those in her journal. Shadowy figures, always watching, always whispering. In the corner of the room, there was a small locked box. The key in my hand seemed to vibrate with anticipation. I knelt down, hands trembling, and inserted the key into the lock. It clicked open easily, revealing a stack of old letters and photographs. The letters were from Sarah's father, a man she had never spoken about. They detailed his descent into madness, his belief that something was haunting their family. He mentioned the key, the whispers, and his attempts to protect Sarah from whatever was tormenting them. One letter, dated just before his death, stood out. "Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I tried to keep it away from you, but it found you anyway. The key is the only way to stop it. You must use it in the place where it all began." I felt a chill run down my spine. The place where it all began. As I read the last line, the house seemed to come alive with whispers, growing louder, more insistent. I had to get out of there. Back in my apartment, I sat with the box and its contents spread out before me. I thought about Sarah, her father's warnings, and the key. The pieces were all there, but I still felt like I was missing something. That night, I dreamed of Sarah. She stood beneath my bed, looking sad but peaceful. "Thank you, Michael," she said softly. "You freed me." I woke up with a start, heart pounding. The room was dark and silent, but I felt a presence. Not the oppressive dread from before, but something familiar, comforting. As I lay there, the realization hit me. The key wasn't just for the box. It was a key to understanding, to accepting the past and the shadows that come with it. Sarah's father had tried to protect her, but in doing so, he had trapped them both in a cycle of fear and denial. The real twist, the thing that recontextualized everything, was this. Sarah wasn't the ghost haunting me. I was haunting myself. The unresolved guilt, the fear, the trauma, it was all inside me, projected into the shadows of my mind. The key had opened a door, not to a literal ghost, but to my own understanding. I looked at the box one last time, then closed it gently. The whispers were gone, but the echoes of the past remained. I knew they always would, but now I could face them, not as a prisoner, but as someone who had finally found the key to his own freedom. Echoes of ashes. It all started in the cozy little town I had moved to, hoping to escape my past. The town was nice, filled with friendly faces and quiet streets. I spent most mornings at the local diner, a warm, bustling place where everyone seemed to know each other. The coffee was mediocre, but the atmosphere made up for it. "Morning, Ethan," said Sarah, the waitress, as she poured me another cup. She had a bright smile that almost made you forget the troubles outside. "Morning, Sarah," I replied, trying to muster up a smile. You see, 5 years ago, I lost my wife, Clara, in a house fire. It was a freak accident, they said, but it left me shattered. I've been carrying the weight of that night ever since. Moving to this town was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to ride and maybe find some peace. One afternoon, while looking for a quiet place to spark some inspiration, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Its charred walls and broken windows spoke of a fire long ago. I don't know why, but I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, like it was calling me. That evening, as I browsed the aisles of the local hardware store, I met Mr. Jenkins, an elderly man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to hold countless stories. "Looking for something particular?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. "Just some tools. Found an old house I might want to fix up," I replied casually. His expression changed. "The house on Maple Street?" he asked, a hint of concern in his tone. "Yeah, that's the one. You know it. Some places are best left alone, son. That house isn't for the living." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just a superstitious old man. But his warning stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. What could possibly be so wrong with that house? I had to find out. And so, my visits began. Ever wonder why some warnings stick with you, like a splinter in your mind? Mr. Jenkins' words echoed in my head as I found myself standing at the edge of the overgrown yard, staring at the old, charred house. It was a cool, gray afternoon. the kind where the sky seems heavy with secrets. The first time I stepped inside, the floorboards creaked under my weight, almost like the house was groaning in pain. The air was thick with the smell of soot and something else. Something metallic and unpleasant. Dust particles danced in the shafts of light that struggled through the broken windows, and every step I took kicked up a cloud that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. As I wandered through the rooms, I noticed small, unsettling details. A child's toy, half melted and forgotten in a corner, seemed to watch me with its one remaining eye. The wallpaper, peeling and stained, had shapes that looked disturbingly like faces twisted in agony. One room in particular caught my attention. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I felt a sudden chill. It wasn't just the cold air. It was like the room itself was alive, aware of my presence. The walls were covered in charred marks, spiraling out from the center as if something had exploded there. In the middle of the room lay a photograph, miraculously untouched by the fire. It showed a woman with a warm smile and kind eyes. Written on the back, in elegant cursive, was the name Eleanor. That night, I couldn't get the house out of my mind. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of my own home, every sound amplified in the darkness. Sleep came in fits, haunted by dreams of fire and whispers. The next morning, as I sat at the diner, Sarah noticed the bags under my eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, pouring me another cup of coffee. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, rubbing my temples. "You ever hear anything about the house on Maple Street?" Sarah's smile faded. "You've been to that place?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "People say it's haunted, that it was cursed after the fire." I leaned in, intrigued. "Cursed? How so?" "Nobody knows for sure. Just that strange things happen there. People hear voices, see things that aren't really there. They say Eleanor's spirit never left." As Sarah walked away, I felt a chill run down my spine. Maybe Mr. Jenkins and the others were right. Perhaps there was something wrong with that house. But the pull was stronger now, more insistent. I had to know more. I had to find out what really happened to Eleanor. In the days that followed, my visits to the house became more frequent. Each time, I noticed new, unsettling details. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. It was as if the house was waking up, aware of my presence, eager to share its secrets. I should have listened to the warnings, but it was too late. The house had its hooks in me, and there was no turning back. I began to spend entire afternoons there, poking around, trying to piece together Eleanor's story. I found more photographs, letters, and even a diary. Each item hinting at a life cut tragically short. But the more I discovered, the more questions I had. One day, as I was leaving the house, I bumped into Mr. Jenkins again. "You look like hell, Ethan," he said, his eyes full of concern. "Thanks for the compliment," I replied, trying to lighten the mood, but my voice lacked conviction. "You need to let it go," he said, his tone serious. "That house, it changes people. It's not healthy. But there's something about it, Mr. Jenkins. Something I need to understand," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Ethan, some things are better left buried," he warned, his voice almost pleading. I wanted to believe him, to walk away and leave the past where it belonged. But every night my dreams grew more vivid, more terrifying. Clara's face morphed into Eleanor's, both of them staring at me with a mixture of sorrow and accusation. One evening, after another restless night, I called my friend Jack, one of the few people who had stuck by me since Clara's death. "Jack, I need to talk," I said, my voice shaking. "What's going on, Ethan?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I've been spending a lot of time at this old house. I think it's haunted," I confessed, feeling foolish as the words left my mouth. There was a pause. "Haunted? Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I can't explain it, but it's like the house is alive, trying to tell me something. I said, the desperation clear. Ethan, you've been through a lot. Maybe you need a break. Come visit. Stay with us for a bit, Jack suggested. I can't, Jack. Not until I figure this out. I need to know what happened to Eleanor, I insisted, the obsession tightening its grip on me. Jack sighed. All right, but promise me you'll be careful. And if things get worse, you'll get out of there. I promise, I said, though I knew it was a promise I might not keep. Days turned into weeks, and my isolation deepened. I stopped answering calls, ignored emails, and distanced myself from everyone. The house became my world, and Eleanor's ghost was my constant companion. I could feel her presence, hear her whispers, and see her in the corners of my vision. One evening, as I was reading her diary by the dim light of an old lantern, I felt a cold breath on my neck. Ethan, a voice whispered, soft and sorrowful. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. My mind was playing tricks on me, or maybe the house was. I didn't know anymore. Who are you? I whispered back, my voice trembling. What do you want? But there was no answer, only the creaking of the old house settling around me. I knew I was teetering on the edge of madness, but I couldn't stop. I was in too deep. Every discovery pulled me further into the house's dark embrace, and every unanswered question drove me closer to the brink. I was losing myself, and yet I couldn't let go. Not until I uncovered the truth, no matter the cost. My obsession had reached a fever pitch, and the line between reality and nightmare was blurring dangerously. One quiet evening, I sat in the old living room, flipping through Eleanor's diary once more. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows through the cracked windows. The words on the page seemed to pulse with life, recounting Eleanor's final days, leading up to the fire. There were entries about her growing fear, about strange noises at night, and ominous warnings she couldn't escape. As darkness enveloped the house, I decided to explore the basement, a place I'd been avoiding. My flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness, illuminating old, rusted tools and broken furniture. The air was damp and cold, sending shivers down my spine. In a far corner, I found a hidden door, partially concealed by debris. With trembling hands, I pushed it open and descended into a deeper, older part of the house. The walls were lined with charred beams, and the smell of smoke grew stronger. At the bottom, I found a small, circular room. In the center stood an ancient, soot-covered mirror. As I approached, my reflection flickered and shifted, morphing into Eleanor's face. Her eyes, filled with sorrow and pain, locked onto mine. "Eleanor," I whispered, my voice echoing off the walls. "What happened to you?" Her reflection mouthed words I couldn't hear. Frustrated and desperate, I reached out to touch the mirror. The moment my fingers brushed the glass, a searing pain shot through my body, and the room erupted into flames. Panicked, I stumbled back, but the flames were everywhere, consuming the room with unnatural speed. I could hear Eleanor's screams, mingled with the crackling fire, and felt her agony as if it were my own. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke choked my lungs. In the midst of the chaos, a figure emerged from the flames. Eleanor, her form both solid and spectral. She moved towards me, her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and pleading. "Why did you come here?" she demanded, her voice a mix of anger and despair. "I wanted to help you," I gasped, tears streaming down my face from the smoke and fear. I needed to know the truth. "The truth?" she repeated, her voice softening. "The truth is, I was trapped, just like you, trapped by my fears, my regrets. How do I free you?" I begged, the heat intensifying around us. "You can't," she whispered, her hand reaching out to touch mine. Her touch was icy cold, a stark contrast to the surrounding inferno. "But you can break the cycle, leave this place, and never look back." The flames roared louder, and I felt the floor beneath me begin to give way. Summoning every ounce of strength, I tore myself away from her grip and ran towards the stairs. The house seemed to fight me, the walls closing in, debris falling. But I pushed through, driven by a primal need to survive. I burst out into the night air, collapsing on the lawn as the house behind me blazed with unnatural fury. I watched in horror as the flames consumed it, the screams of Eleanor mingling with the roar of the fire. The next morning, I stood before the smoldering ruins, my body aching and my mind reeling. I had faced the heart of the horror, and while I had escaped with my life, I knew I would never be the same. Jack called me later that day. "Ethan, are you all right?" "What happened?" I think it's over," I replied, my voice hollow. "The house is gone, but Eleanor, she was real, Jack, and she was suffering." "What are you going to do now?" he asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the ashes. "But I need to move forward for both of us." The truth of the house on Maple Street was a burden I would carry forever, a reminder of the fine line between curiosity and obsession. But in facing it, I had also faced my own demons, and maybe I could finally begin to heal. The fire department ruled the blaze as an accident, attributing it to old wiring and a stray spark. But I knew the truth. The house had been a living entity, feeding on pain and suffering. Now, standing among the ashes, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Eleanor was free, but the cost had been high. Jack came to visit a few days later. We sat on my porch, the evening sun casting long shadows across the yard. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his concern evident. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's like I've been living in a nightmare, and now that it's over, I can't tell what's real anymore." Jack nodded, understanding. "You went through something unimaginable, Ethan. It's going to take time." I stared at the horizon, lost in thought. Eleanor was trapped, Jack, and in trying to help her, I realized I've been trapped too, by my guilt, my grief. Maybe this was my way of confronting it. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "And you did. You faced it head on. That's more than most people can say." For a while, I tried to return to my routine. I went back to the diner, started writing again, and even visited Clara's grave, seeking some form of closure. But the memories of the house haunted me, invading my dreams and thoughts. One night, as I was going through the remains of my belongings salvaged from the fire, I found Eleanor's diary. It was the only thing that had survived the blaze, untouched by the flames. As I flipped through the pages, one entry caught my eye, dated the night of the fire. Eleanor had written about a dark force, something ancient and malevolent, that had taken root in the house. She believed it was responsible for her suffering, and that it fed on the fear of those who entered. Her last words sent a chill down my spine. "It won't stop until it consumes everything." My heart raced as I reread the passage. What if the house wasn't the source of the horror, but a conduit for something far worse? Something that still existed, waiting for its next victim? As the realization sank in, the surrounding air grew cold, and a familiar whisper echoed in the room. "Ethan." I spun around, but no one was there. The whispering continued, growing louder, more insistent. I grabbed the diary and stumbled outside, trying to escape the suffocating presence. But the whispers followed, a chorus of torment and despair. In panic, I ran to Jack's house, bursting through the door. "Jack, it's not over. The house, it was just the beginning." He looked at me with wide eyes, his face pale. "Ethan, calm down. What are you talking about? The force that was in the house, it's still here. It's following me." I gasped, holding up the diary. Eleanor warned about it. "It's not bound to the house. It's free now." Jack grabbed my shoulders, trying to steady me. "Ethan, you need to breathe. We'll figure this out." But even as he spoke, I could see the fear in his eyes, mirroring my own. The realization hit us both at the same time. The house might be gone, but the evil it harbored was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to latch onto its next victim. At that moment, I understood that my battle was far from over. The true horror was not the house itself, but the ancient malevolence that now roamed free. And as I looked into Jack's eyes, I knew that our fight had just begun. The terror I thought I had conquered was only the beginning of a much darker, more insidious nightmare. The echoes of the past still whispered, and the shadows seemed to grow longer with each passing day. The horror of the house on Maple Street had redefined my reality, and I was left to confront an even greater unknown. The twist in my tale was that the true terror was never the house. It was the darkness that now stalked me, relentless and hungry.